During the Second World War, in the year 1944, the opening scenario takes place. Hank Marlowe from the United States and Gunpei Ikari from Japan parachute into an island in the South Pacific. They start shooting at each other as soon as they touch down. Hank flees after they run out of ammunition, and Gunpei chases after him. They soon get near a cliff and start fighting closely. However, a big ape suddenly appears and breaks up their struggle. The scene then shifts to 1973, where Houston Brooks, a geologist, and Bill Rhonda, the leader of the American government agency Monarch, arrive in Senator Willis's office. The two discuss their idea to investigate the recently discovered Skull Island in search of ancient creatures. When Willis pauses, Bill reveals that the 1954 nuclear tests weren't actually tests, but rather attempts to destroy a rare environment. Despite this, Willis starts to back away from the concept as though he doesn't like it. However, Bill and Houston continue on after him, highlighting the island's potential worth and the necessity to stop other countries from seizing the initiative. Senator Willis ultimately agrees to let them speak about the Soviet Union. Bill is then given the assignment to put together a U.S. Army regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Preston Packard. Bill and Houston then take a trip to Saigon to engage James Conrad, a former British Special Air Service captain, to serve as their tracker for this mission. They meet him in a neighborhood tavern, and give him a brief explanation of their objective and an offer of assistance. When James hears this, he demands more cash, while citing the several potentially fatal hazards present, including rain, heat, muck disease-carrying flies, and others. James is the only one qualified for this role. Therefore, the two decide to comply with his request. Next, Bill employs Mason Weaver, a photojournalist who opposes war. The ship sets off in the direction of its target with everyone aboard. As they go, a NASA representative by the name of Victor Neves explains that Kong Skull Island is cut off from the outside world because of the persistent storm system that surrounds it. With the aid of Preston's military helicopters, he expects that they will be able to get through it. Victor also presents Bill, Houston, and San Lin, each a different scientist, to the assembled crew. A military serviceman named Jack Chapman continues the briefing by warning them that the ongoing storm will interfere with their ability to communicate and could lead to their separation. As a result, he arranges a rendezvous point on the northern edge of the island, with the goal of converging there in 3 days. They observe a massive storm with dark clouds. As they get closer to the island, which they must navigate around, the team decides to continue despite the severe weather, so everyone boards the helicopters and takes off. As they enter the storm, the situation becomes more critical, resulting in severe turbulence for the helicopters. Thankfully, they navigate it and arrive at the island, which is evidently incredibly lovely. Soon after, the soldiers began dropping seismic bombs to map the island and support Houston's theory of the hollow earth, up until the squad is assaulted by the gigantic ape from the opening sequence. Everything appears to be going according to plan. He is none other than the legendary beast Kong. The troops shoot back, but it seems the enormous creature is unaffected by their bullets. Kong retaliates by bringing down each chopper one by one and dispersing the survivors throughout the island. Following this, two groups of survivors emerge, one with Preston, Bill, and the troops, including Cole, Mills, and Woodward, and the other with James, Mason, Victor, Houston, San Lin, and a soldier by the name of Slivko. Preston then tries to get in touch with his troops, but only Jack is able to give him his location before the transmission goes dead. The next scene finds a furious Preston holding Bill at gunpoint and demanding an explanation of the true purpose of their mission. In response, Bill says that decades ago, while sailing in the ocean with his family, their boat was sunk by a legendary beast. The authorities asserted that the accident was caused by mechanical failure, yet only he was able to live. Since then, Bill has made it his goal to establish the reality of these monsters, which is why he has led the team to this location. Preston and his group then started walking towards where Jack was. One of the soldiers' lips is pierced by a bamboo tree as they proceed into the forest. The next instant, a massive spider-like thing emerges and seizes one of the companions. The soldier strategically slices off his limbs as they are about to devour him and falls to the ground. The others then start firing on the beast, eventually killing it by shooting off its head. James, however, guides his group in the direction of the meeting place. They make unsuccessful attempts to make radio contact with the other survivors while on their trek. The group witnesses a huge, buffalo-like beast while passing by a lake, which sends them into a panic. James, though, evaluates the circumstances and urges the group to maintain composure. He is aware that the creature has no desire to hurt them. The beast turns away and departs, confirming what he suspected. As they travel on, the group encounters a location where they are cornered by the indigenous Iwi tribesmen, who draw their weapons. Hank, who is still alive, arrives just as a brawl breaks out. He reassures them both that there is no danger to one another. Then the locals extended an invitation to the group to visit a safe colony. When they arrive, Hank informs the group that he has lived on the island for the past 28 years, and has gained extensive knowledge of its inhabitants. He claims that because Kong has been defending the islanders from predators like a race of underground reptile animals known as skull crawlers, Kong is almost like a deity to the island. They were the ones who killed Gunpei, his closest buddy, who was Japanese. He continues by saying that while Kong can easily deal with the smaller skull crawlers, the largest one is hazardous, and has even murdered members of his family. He makes the implication that the skull crawlers will rule the island if something happens to Kong. James changes the subject after hearing all of this, and informs Hank that the rescue crew will reach the northern half of the island in 3 days. Hank, though, thinks it will take them far longer than that to get to the north. He then directs the party to a yacht they built together before Gunpei passed away. They decide to finish building the boat, because it still needs some finishing touches, so that it can transport them to the northern side when they want. Except for Mason, who interacts with the indigenous, the crew members begin work on the boat. Mason picks up a sound later that is coming from the opposite side of the wall. When she checks, she discovers a creature that resembles a buffalo trapped beneath a downed aircraft. To rescue the buffalo, she tries to lift it up, but her power is insufficient. Kong appears out of nowhere at that precise moment, and throws the plane aside, freeing the trapped creature. He appears to acknowledge her act of kindness, as he briefly glances at Mason before walking away. In other places, Jack tries to talk to the Colonel again but is unsuccessful. After that, he rests on a large tree trunk, but when it moves, it becomes clear that it is not a tree, but rather a creature. Jack fires after being startled, which causes the thing to flee. Unfortunately, a skull crawler is drawn to the sound of gunfire, and mercilessly kills him. Jane's crew is still working on the boat as night falls. Mason tries to take some shots of the northern lights in the midst of this, but her flashlight appears to be broken. James hands her his lighter, a keepsake from his father, as he notices that she is struggling. The boat was ultimately prepared for departure by the following morning. After saying goodbye to the natives and retrieving Gunpei's sword from his grave, the group rides down the river together. Hank confides in the group about his family when they are sailing, and shares his desire to see them again. They hear Preston's voice after regaining their radio signal a little bit later. They request that the Colonel use a flare cannon to locate them. The group eagerly guides their boat in the direction of the flare's brilliance. Their joy, however, is short-lived as a flock of carnivorous birds appear out of nowhere and drag Victor away, tearing him to pieces. The gang decides to continue traveling in the direction of the remaining team members. Despite the devastating sight, they eventually disembark the boat and proceed into the woods, where they meet up with Preston. James suggests that everyone get on the boat and head to the northern side after this reunion. The Colonel begs to differ, insisting on looking for Jack on the west side. Hank opposes the notion, since the skull crawlers reside on the west side. James grudgingly agrees, though, explaining that he was brought here as a tracker, with the caveat that they must return before dusk. The group enters a restricted area that was once the site of a conflict between Kong's forebears and the skull crawlers in the following scenario, which is led by Hank. Preston commands them to cross it in spite of Hank's protests. As they go, an unexpected attack by a skull crawler forces them to hide behind the enormous bones. When the skull crawler approaches those bones, it vomits a skull-bearing Jack's tag. The group moves onward when the place becomes quiet because they think the beast has left. Their presumption is disproved. though, when it reappears and devours Bill, the group fires a hail of gunfire in revenge, but the powerful creature is impervious to the bullet's harm. The soldiers fight it with machine guns and flamethrowers. As a result, a wave of carnivorous birds also assaulted them, which only made the situation worse. The deadly gas canisters Slivko is carrying explode when he is struck by the skull crawler in the middle of the chaos. After killing a few birds, Hank gives the sword to James, who then uses it to slaughter every bird in his path as he heads to save Slivko. Slivko is captured, but the skull crawler materializes in their path. Mason hurls James' lighter inside the thing, blowing it up just as it looks like they're going to die. Preston nevertheless exhorts them to carry on their hunt afterward. In response, James displays Jack's identification tag, revealing his demise. The Colonel, however, is unwavering in his resolve to get to the crash site and recover the munitions cache, so they can kill Kong and exact revenge for the deaths of the men. Preston doesn't change his mind despite attempts by Hank, Houston, and Mason to explain the consequences of killing Kong and the consequent release of the skull crawlers. With no other options, James tells Preston where the accident site is so that his party can go there while the others go back to the boat. Preston obtains explosives from the crash site that evening and puts up a Kong trap. James and Mason, in the meantime, move to a cliff to determine the direction of the river flowing north. Kong appears in front of them during this but doesn't attack. As a symbol of their camaraderie, Mason moves closer to him and softly touches him. Kong moves in that direction as soon as he notices the explosions Preston's squad put off. Along with Hank, James and Mason decide to save their gigantic friend. After realizing that he is in danger, the Colonel attempts to burn Kong by setting the entire pond on fire. As soon as he reaches Preston's crew, the enormous gorilla makes an effort to fight back, killing a number of troops, but it eventually falls to the ground. Preston then gives the command for his remaining troops to get ready to blow Kong up with explosives. Before they can, though, James, Mason, and Hank show up on the scene and order them to back off while holding them at gunpoint. The soldiers are persuaded that Kong is necessary to keep the skull crawlers out. The other soldiers turn against their colonel after a difficult standoff, but Preston is steadfast. The group is immediately forced to flee as the largest skull crawler suddenly emerges from the ground. Preston stays behind to detonate the explosives, but Kong awakens and crushes him before he can. The wounded creature then starts battling the massive skull crawler, but it finds it difficult to keep up. The group runs away and heads for the water. Mason is told by James to make it to a cliff and fire a flare, so that Houston and the team can find them. The remainder of them continue running until the skull crawler ambushes them. At one point, Cole makes the decision to give his life to save the lives of his crew, so he unpins the grenades and approaches the creature. He makes the ultimate sacrifice, but the creature simply tosses him away with its tail. A furious battle breaks out between the two enormous beasts, just before the skull crawler is about to strike the group. Despite Kong's best efforts, the skull crawler eventually throws him away, leading him to become hooked on some chains. The skull crawler then kills Kong, but Houston and the others show up with their boat just in time and start shooting. Mason also throws a flare at the monster, which causes it to become distracted long enough for Kong to escape. Mason unintentionally falls into the ocean when Kong retaliates by flinging the skull crawler into a cliff. Kong saves her quickly, but the long tongue of the skull crawler clutches his arm. This turns out to be the ideal occasion for our beast, who uses his incredible strength to pull out the creature's guts, killing it at last. Mason is then set down next to James by Kong before he departs. Following these incidents, the survivors depart the island and arrive at their rendezvous spot. As Kong stoically observes, Hank's emotional reunion with his family at the film's conclusion marks a long-awaited turning point in their relationship.